Hello there. Welcome to Sumit Academy. I do hope that you have subscribed to my channel. Do subscribe now so that you do not miss out on my previous or future videos. I do hope that you have had time to see my two earlier videos on what is disaster and what is disaster management. In this video, we shall talk about how the government is dealing with disasters. Has anyone been given responsibility for the various areas which may be affected? Well, depending on the type of disaster, a nodal ministry has been assigned the task of coordinating all activities of the state and district administration and other support departments and ministries. These are: for air accidents, Ministry of Civil Aviation; for civil strife, Ministry of Home Affairs; for major breakdown of any of the essential services posing widespread problems, obviously the concerned ministries of the central government; for railway accidents, Ministry of Railways; for chemical disasters, Ministry of Environment; for biological disasters, Ministry of Health; and for nuclear accidents inside or outside the country which poses health or other hazards to people in India, Department of Atomic Energy. Let us now have a look at some of the principles of disaster management. Firstly, disaster management is the responsibility of all spheres of government. No single service or government in itself has the capability to achieve comprehensive disaster management. Each affected service or department must have a disaster management plan. Secondly, disaster management should use resources that exist for a day-to-day purpose. There are limited resources available specifically for disasters, and it would be neither cost-effective nor practical to have large holdings of dedicated disaster resources. However, governments must ensure that there is a minimum budget allocation to enable appropriate response to incidents as they arise and to prepare for and reduce the risk of disasters occurring. Thirdly, organizations should function as an extension of their core business. Disaster management is about the use of resources in the most effective manner. To achieve this during disasters, organizations should be employed in a manner that reflects their day-to-day role. But it should be done in a coordinated manner across all relevant organizations. This is not the time to learn something different. Fourthly, individuals are responsible for their own safety. Individuals need to be made aware of the hazards that could affect their community and the countermeasures, which include the district disaster management plan that are in place to deal with them. Fifthly, disaster management planning should focus on large-scale events. It is easier to scale down a response than it is to scale up if arrangements have been based on incident scale events. A well-prepared plan for a major disaster can very well respond to smaller incidents and emergencies. The sixth principle is that disaster management planning should recognize the difference between incidents and disasters. However, incidents like fires that occur in informal settlements and regular floods still require multi-agency and multi-jurisdictional coordination. The scale of the disaster will indicate when it is beyond the capacity of the local authorities to respond and when it needs the involvement of other agencies. The seventh principle of disaster management is that operational arrangements are additional to and do not replace incident management operational arrangements. Single service incident management operational arrangements will need to continue whenever practical during disaster operations. The eighth principle of disaster management states that disaster management planning must take into account of the type of physical environment and the structure of the population. The physical shape and size of the area and the spread of population must be considered when developing counter-disaster plans. This will ensure that appropriate prevention, preparation, response, and recovery mechanisms can be put in place in a timely manner. The ninth principle of disaster management deals with the importance of non-governmental organizations or NGOs. Disaster management arrangements must recognize the involvement and potential role of NGOs. This is because significant skills and resources needed during disaster operations are controlled by NGOs. These agencies must be consulted and included in the planning process. We now come to an act which signified a major shift in government strategy towards management of disaster, and that is the National Disaster Management Act 2005. For far too long, disaster management in India was marginalized as an issue of providing relief and rehabilitation to the people affected by natural calamities. While in the central government, it occupied a place in the Ministry of Agriculture. In the states, it was a concern of the revenue or relief departments. And in the districts, it was one of the many crisis management functions of the district collector. When two natural calamities struck in quick succession, the Odisha super cyclone in 1999 and the Gujarat earthquake in 2001, it brought about the realization that there was a need for having a specialist response mechanism at the national level to effectively respond to disasters. The Government of India, in recognition of the importance of disaster management as a national priority, set up a high-powered committee in August 1999 and a national committee after the Gujarat earthquake for making recommendations on the preparation of disaster management plans and suggesting effective mitigation mechanisms. The 10th five-year plan also, for the first time, had a detailed chapter on disaster management. The 12th Finance Commission was also mandated to review the financial arrangements for disaster management. On the 23rd of December 2005, the Government of India enacted the Disaster Management Act, which envisaged the creation of the National Disaster Management Authority, or the NDMA, headed by the Prime Minister, and state disaster management authorities, SDMAs, headed by the respective chief ministers, to spearhead and implement a holistic and integrated approach to disaster management in India. The vision of the NDMA is to build a safer and disaster resilient India by a holistic, proactive, technology driven, and sustainable development strategy that involves all stakeholders and fosters a culture of prevention, preparedness, and mitigation. It seeks to empower stakeholders for improving the effectiveness of disaster management in India. It strives to promote a national resolve to mitigate the damage and destruction caused by natural and man-made disasters through sustained and collective efforts of all government agencies, non-governmental organizations, and people's participation. This is planned to be accomplished by adopting a technology-driven, proactive, multi-hazard, and multi-sectoral strategy for building a safer, disaster resilient, and dynamic India. The Act made statutory provisions for constitution of a National Disaster Response Force, the NDRF, for the purpose of specialized response to natural and man-made disasters. This force constitutes battalions from the BSF, CRPF, CISF, the SSB, and the ITBP. These are located at different locations based on the vulnerability profile of the country. Towards this, it has the following responsibility. Number 1, lay down policies on disaster management. Number 2, approve the national plan for disaster management. Number 3, approve plans prepared by the ministries or departments of the Government of India in accordance with the national plan. Number 4, lay down guidelines to be followed by the state authorities in drawing up the state plan. Number 5, lay down guidelines to be followed by the different ministries or departments of the Government of India for the purpose of integrating the measures for prevention of disaster or the mitigation of its effects in their development plans and projects. Number 6, coordinate the enforcement and implementation of the policy and plans for disaster management. Number 7, recommend provision of funds for the purpose of mitigation. Number 8, provide such support to other countries affected by major disasters as may be determined by the central government. Number 9, take such other measures for the prevention of disaster or the mitigation or preparedness and capacity building for dealing with threatening disaster situations or disasters as it may consider necessary. And finally, number 10, lay down broad policies and guidelines for the functioning of the NIDM, the National Institute of Disaster Management. Now the National Institute of Disaster Management is the premier institute for training and drawing up capacity development programs for managing natural disasters in India on a national as well as a regional basis. In the backdrop of the International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction, a National Center for Disaster Management was established in 1995 in the Indian Institute of Public Administration by the Ministry of Agriculture and Cooperation, the then nodal ministry for disaster management in the country. The center was upgraded as the National Institute of Disaster Management on 16th October 2003, following the transfer of the subject of disaster management to the Ministry of Home Affairs and implementation of the Disaster Management Act 2005. It now also serves as the International SARC Disaster Management Center. The vision of the institute is to play the role of a premier institute for capacity development in India and the region. Under the Disaster Management Act 2005, the institute has been assigned nodal responsibilities for human resource development, capacity building, training, research, documentation, and policy advocacy in the field of disaster management. Both as a national center and then as the National Institute, the institute has a crucial role in bringing disaster risk reduction to the forefront of the national agenda. It has been mandated by the Government of India to be a deemed university and institute of excellence on higher learning and capacity building. It has developed a model curriculum for disaster management in higher education and research. Most central universities has envisaged Center for Disaster Management under their School of Environmental Studies. NIDM conducts periodic checks to regulate effective earthquake and disaster control policies throughout the country with support from semi-government, private firms and non-governmental organizations. It also conducts mock drills and crisis communication exercises. The second wing of the NDMA is the National Disaster Response Force. It is a unit created by the government in 2009 for the purpose of specialized response to natural and man-made disasters. It works under the National Disaster Management Authority, which lays down the policies, plans, and guidelines for disaster management. It consists of 8 battalions of the Central Forces, 2 battalions each from the Border Security Force, the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, the Central Industrial Security Force, and the Central Reserve Police Force, and is being trained to fight all natural disasters, including radiological, biological, chemical, and nuclear disasters, and to conduct search and rescue operations in the event of any natural catastrophe. However, most of the states are largely lethargic in creating a disaster response mechanism as mandated by the Disaster Management Act 2005. Till now, only 16 states have taken some action, and only 6 states, Odisha, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Tripura, Punjab, and Bihar, have a modicum of a structure so as to deal with disasters. Of these, Odisha alone has raised an ultra-efficient force, which in collaboration with the NDRF efficiently controlled destructions during the cyclones there. Uttarakhand even now has just a token force for disaster response mechanism. Jammu and Kashmir had none when floods destroyed the state. We now move on to the National Disaster Management Guidelines. Soon after the NDMA was set up, a series of consultations were initiated with various stakeholders to facilitate the development of guidelines for strengthening earthquake management. These meetings acknowledged that several initiatives taken up by the government agencies in the recent past have been significant and far-reaching, but they also highlighted the need for a holistic and integrated strategy. On the basis of these deliberations, the NDMA has prepared guidelines for the management of droughts, earthquakes, heat waves, school safety, hospital safety, tsunamis, cyclones, floods, urban floods, landslides, snow avalanches, nuclear and radiological emergencies, chemical disaster, industrial as well as terrorism related, and finally, biological disasters. The guidelines also talk of medical preparedness, mass casualty management, psychosocial support, incident response system, information and communication system, and seismic retrofitting of deficient buildings. and structures. Among the important guidelines are: first, Management of Earthquakes, issued in April 2007. Second, Management of Floods, issued in January 2008. Third, Management of Cyclones, issued in April 2008. The Management of Droughts is the fourth one, issued in September 2010. Of course, we shall be studying some of these guidelines at some length while discussing the respective disasters in my later videos. Well, that's all from me in this video. This video is based on the information freely available and no originality is claimed for the same. The intention of this video is only to prepare candidates for answering examination questions on the subject. I do hope that you like this video. Do subscribe to my channel now so that you do not miss out on any of my previous or future videos. Till later then, cheerio.